on January 16th, WWF launched the Biodiversity Risk Filter, BRF, at the World Economic Forum in Davos. But what is a biodiversity risk filter? And what is the role of businesses to protect and enhance biodiversity? We'll now dig a bit deeper into this and we'll ask to enter on stage Camilla Välimaa. She's expert on business and biodiversity at WWF Sweden, and she will now enlighten us about this. So please give Camilla a warm hand.
Thank you.
Great to have you here, Camilla.
Thank you.
You have the table and you have our full attention.
Thank you very much. Okay. I will talk to you about what we think that all businesses should do all over the world, depending regardless of what sectors you're in. And we know that you can do it and you need to do it, and it's possible to act and scale up, increase the pace. I can't see my slide, that's why I'm a bit confused. Okay, in a second. Great. Then I'll click forward here. We'll see the lovely pictures from Alexandre again. And then you'll soon see why I started the way I did. Okay, so we're going to talk about what all businesses can do and should do to scale up and increase the pace on biodiversity. Some companies think this is a new issue, and we'll show you that it's not entirely. We need the business sector, like Alexandre said, for us to reach the new global targets on biodiversity that came up now for 2030, and also the climate targets. Just briefly about WWF, in case you don't know us, we're an independent conservation NGO. What I'd like to say, apart from the fact that we were founded a long time ago and active in nearly 100 countries, I represent the WWF Swedish office. Our mission is to stop the degradation of the planet's natural environment and build a future in which human lives in harmony with nature. And why I want to stop there is that, just like Antonelli showed, that it's very important in this transformation, when we work towards conservation or sustainability or climate goals, that we also ensure human rights and indigenous people's rights. We're not going to talk that much about it in the coming sessions, but it's always with us. As I think you all know, the biodiversity is fundamental to business, where all business sectors are dependent and impacting nature. And according to World Economic Forum, more than half of the world's GDP is directly dependent on functioning ecosystems. And with that, of course, we mean the ones active in nature immediately: agriculture, forestry, fishing, and mining. But I mean, the other half of the GDP is directly dependent on nature. Just like me standing here, I need food and water, and I've covered myself with clothes from agriculture, etc. All of us are independent on biodiversity. There is, however, some hope. I'd like to shed some hope. Research also states that we can bend this curve back on biodiversity. We need more conservation efforts, and luckily we've got the global targets now that 30%, it states 30% need protection globally, 30% restored. But that's not going to be enough, as you see on the green, bending the curve. We also need to take a step back from nature and produce more sustainably and consume more sustainably. And there's 23 targets in the global biodiversity targets, but one is also about halving the impact from pollution. But if we do this together, we're going to make it work. And what should a company do then, or a business? What is biodiversity for a business? Well, we state that for it to be credible and to take a full scope of biodiversity, you need to work with two areas. And the red one is to stop contributing to biodiversity loss. There you find the 5 drivers for loss, like the IPBES, the governmental panel have identified as the reasons why we lose biodiversity. And we have the conversion of land, forest to agriculture, it could be pollution, plastic pollution, eutrophication, and you have the resource overexploitation, overharvesting. And you also have invasive species and diseases that are coming up more. And climate change, like Alexandre talked about, is if we can't reach the climate targets, we're going to have climate change being the main driver for biodiversity loss. And you could call climate change and biodiversity as Siamese twins. Where climate goes, biodiversity needs to go. You need to work with both. You need functioning nature to be able to combat climate change. And as you see in the red arrow, these are very familiar topics. This is environmental work since decades ago. And you could say that we collectively have failed to do enough, even if we have good examples of environmental work. So we really need to scale up. On the other hand, these are well-acquainted topics for us, so we really know what we need to know to work harder. In the green arrow, you have the more newer topics for businesses, where you should play a role in also contributing to conservation and restoration. And then you have the more sustainable use of natural resources, agriculture and forestry practices, where we have certifications that we need to improve and use more. So there's a lot of things that can be scaled up and increased in this work. Where are the companies today then? We did a report with Bain & Company, released in February, and we interviewed 10 of the largest Swedish companies and had a survey for 40. And this also been done in Finland and Denmark. And it showed that quite few have tangible targets on biodiversity. Quite a lot of them, though, realize that there's a large risk of biodiversity loss. And they have a very high interest in working more with it. So they may not be ready, but they're willing. I can recommend reading this report. It's a global report with a Swedish perspective, where you can find a lot of tools and knowledge and roadblocks and discussions on how to address biodiversity. I'm going to stay on the higher level, and I'm going to go back to a few points that I think that all companies can do today. As you've understood, we want you to take a whole perspective of both not stop to contribute to loss of biodiversity, but also increase the positive. And you need to look at the value chain, just like Alexandre was talking about. And some of these issues in the red arrow are related to general business practices. Climate change, fossil fuels shouldn't be used anywhere in the value chain, and that goes for contribution to eutrophication, etc. So that's where you can scale up the level of your targets. The other thing about biodiversity is that it's local. The species actually live in nature, so you need to be checking your value chain. Where are you? What activities do you do? And what are the state of biodiversity there? And that's a lot more complicated. And I'm going to get back to you with an example of how you can address that. And you need to set ambitious targets and science-based targets. And we have science-based targets for climate since a long time. And in May, science-based target for nature will come. That will be version 1, and they've taken on a large scope, targets for nature. So it will not be comprehensive as a start. But there's a lot of science out there to have science-founded targets for all the other areas. So we need to have ambitious science-based targets. And like we said before, or I said before, we need to take a step back as well. It will not be enough to produce more sustainably. We need to conserve and protect and restore more. So we need to work harder on producing more value with less resources. And even here, you can recognize what companies have started to do, right? Resource efficiency, circular economy. But it needs to be scaled up and increase the pace a lot, because 7 years is not a long time to 2030. You mentioned, Katarina, the risk filter that we launched in February in World Economic Forum. It's a risk filter that's online, that is free of use. We had a freshwater risk filter previously, and that's been there for 12 years. And now we're introducing biodiversity risk filter. It's based on global data sets, so anybody can go in here and look at the state of different biodiversity topics globally, and also there's information on different sectors and the impact they have. But the most interesting part is that you can go in and plot in where you are in your value chain, where your locations are, and you will get back information on how high the risk is for the company, but also the risk level in nature where you are. So you can get a first prioritization of where you have so-called hotspots where you should work also on the ground, apart from these general higher targets. And this risk filter will also be of help then in some of the coming regulations and frameworks. We have the CSRD for the EU on reporting, and the target setting for SBTN, and the disclosure framework for TNFD. There will be loads of acronyms, so there are many, many more coming, and frameworks and tools. But this will help in the prioritization for that. Okay. Doing all this, taking this full grip and looking into your value chain that we all know is very challenging, not just to know where you are. It's going to take time, and it's iterative process for a company. So we really urge everybody to act on everything we know now. And every single act in nature actually counts, but you need to choose a bit with care because there's also a fragile state out there. But there is a lot of knowledge. We're going to see a few examples from the other companies on where they're doing projects in their value chain where there is more material to their business, and this is very important. But we can also do local projects in collaboration with the local conservation organizations or municipalities or other experts. This could be in an industrial park, for instance, where they've changed the light to red lights for the bats, for instance. Even in the local, if you choose well in local context, it can also be of importance. And we have a lot of certification schemes. So use credible certification schemes with ambitious biodiversity criteria and work with them to improve in this area so that they can help you on the journey. We have one example here that is from natural pasture beef. In Sweden, we have a lot of old agricultural land with species that are dependent on grazing, and it's not financially viable today to keep cattle and those lands, so there is a certification scheme for that. There is as much as 40 species per square meter in these pasture lands, so it's very important. We're going to hear more about certification schemes from Axfood later on. So to sum it up, we really think that you need to take a full grip on biodiversity, work on your strategy, both on what we would call the environmental area, the red arrow, because we need to scale it up radically, the pace on reducing the impact, and set the science-based targets or science-founded targets, and set your journey and educate everybody that needs to be educated. But the most important is to act on what we already know, and that is to take a step back, work on resource efficiency, work on the new business model to actually use less resources and less space in nature, and work with projects. And we're going to get back to the advocacy and policy part towards the end of the session as well. All of this can be scaled up, and we can increase the pace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camilla.
Thank you.
Sorry about the intervention here.
Well,
we have invited climate activists to join us on Saturday, and of course we're all here to create more dialogue, but it's just unfortunate that it was a bit interrupted your conversation, but you handled it very coolly. So to really clarify the businesses here, 3 simple things to get them started if they have not really picked up their pace yet.
I think that they should look at the 2 arrows and make a gap analysis of what they're doing today. What topics of these are they working on? What are they not covering? And then you get to the next level of the value chain to see how much of the value chain do we know and how can we map that? And then use the biodiversity risk filter tool, for instance, to get started. and explore the frameworks that are coming and see how they can be guided.
Thank you. And there's, of course, plenty of support to get from WWF.
Yes.
So please take a seat.
Thank you.
Because you'll be intervening and joining us later on. But now we will move on, and we are going to hear from an interesting collaboration here. Company activities. First, we'll hear about the ongoing collaboration in South Africa between WWF and the multinational clothing company H&M. So I have with me on Zoom to clarify how this works. We have with us Jaco du Toit, Biodiversity and Policy Manager at WWF and H&M Group Partnership. And there you are, Jaco. Wonderful to have you join us. It looks like you're in Sweden, but I know you are not. It's just the backdrop. So Jaco, the H&M Group seems to have made significant progress in the topic of biodiversity. What do you think are the success factors that we can learn from in this collaboration, and how have you worked together?
Thank you very much. So I hope I can talk you through our work together a little bit, and then in summary come back to those specific success factors, because I think there are some learnings to share.
You have our attention. Fire away.
Thank you. Without a sign even. So are my slides up? I cannot see that. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So while my presentation today will focus on biodiversity, it's very important to recognize that this happens in a broader context. So if you look at the left on the slide, H&M Group's biodiversity ambition falls under their circularity and climate pillar of their sustainability approach. And that sits next to another pillar on fair and equal practices, all built on a foundation of respect for human rights. So even though we don't talk about those in short presentations like these, the work on biodiversity has to happen in that context. Likewise, if you look on the right-hand side, our partnership with H&M has a focus across climate, freshwater, and biodiversity, and we see these as interrelated topics. So if we take out little bits, then that doesn't mean we don't think that the others has to be addressed in conjunction with those. Next slide, please. So for WWF, our broad approach to company action on biodiversity can generally be broken down into three areas: commit, act, and advocate. So the commit part is where companies broadly start setting the direction of travel and develop the strategy to get there. So in the H&M example, H&M set an ambition in early 2020 to work towards a net positive impact on biodiversity. And this statement of intent was a critical first step because it meant that the resources and staff time had to be made available for this area of work. And then the next step, almost analogous to what Camilla said earlier, was to then stand back and get a better understanding of their departure point. So they commissioned a study on their biodiversity materiality for the top 5 commodities that they make use of. And the graphic on the left presents a summary of that research piece, showing that the size of each box shows the amount of relative land area required to produce a commodity. But then the colors of the boxes within that indicate the ecological importance and the severity of the impacts on that land. So you can see that the large red and yellow squares in wool and cotton demonstrate that the land used for that production is where there's a real impact on biodiversity that has to be prioritized. The report then includes further details on where these areas are and what some of the impacts might be. So WWF is now working with H&M to complement this work through using our biodiversity risk filter, which was recently launched. And that can provide a more nuanced understanding of potential biodiversity risks that go just beyond just the land use. And all of this work then in turn is positioning H&M to be ready to set more specific time-bound targets, including potentially against the guidelines of the Science Based Targets Network as they come out. Traceability to farm level remains one of the major challenges that we face in this sector and industry. We need to resolve that, but it's also encouraging that we are finding interim workarounds. That means we don't need to delay action while we wait for that traceability to be developed. Next slide, please. Because the crisis is so urgent and we need to act while we plan, we've already started implementing projects, and I'll just talk about 2 specific ones today. So particularly, we're introducing regenerative farming practices in the Satpura Pench wildlife corridor in India. And so this landscape still functions for people and nature by providing livelihoods for communities through cotton growing, while allowing tigers and other wildlife to move between protected areas. But it is under threat from large-scale commercial agriculture and infrastructure development. So by working together to support smallholder farmers to adopt regenerative farming practices, we aim to reduce their input cost, enhance their profitability, and regenerate natural systems, which will all in turn help to secure these vital wildlife corridors. Similarly, in South Africa, we're working with commercial and communal farmers in and around the area earmarked for the country's newest national park. And by introducing regenerative grazing practices for sheep, we aim to address overgrazing and unsustainable land use related to wool production. And it's interesting and encouraging that if livestock is managed regeneratively, it can actually fulfill an ecological niche and contribute to the healthy functioning of the natural ecosystems within this grasslands landscape, which is also a critical water source area. So such projects are invaluable to develop an understanding of the challenges farmers and suppliers face on the ground and to start acting immediately. And then we do face this challenge of how do we take projects like this up to the scale where we can reach hundreds of thousands of suppliers towards adopting more regenerative practices. Certification certainly plays a role, but it has to be combined with landscape level action. And what's clear is that collaboration at multiple levels is required if we are to achieve the necessary systems transformation. Next slide, please. And this is why WWF also works with H&M Group to engage policymakers and to collaborate with other companies. So over the last couple of years, our partnership has supported the call for strong government frameworks for biodiversity, including through events like co-hosting a business and biodiversity workshop during Stockholm Plus 50 with IKEA, supporting H&M Group company leaders to speak on this topic at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and at the Biodiversity COP15 conference in Montreal at the end of last year, and supporting all of this through media outreach to emphasize the importance of this issue for companies. And coalitions like Business for Nature have been critical collaborative channels for this work. Next slide. So that was really a lightning tour of some of the work we're doing together. I hope that the experiences shared shows that it is possible for a company to work on biodiversity, even though it can seem like a very complex topic. While many of the answers for the challenges still remain, to be found, our partnerships with companies like H&M are working to get closer to that level of change required. We can only solve this crisis through collaboration and taking action as soon as possible, because we really don't have time. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jaco. So what would you say are the key success factors that other companies can take away from this collaboration with H&M?
Thanks for picking that up again. Yeah, so basically in summary, I think it's really important to do that moonshot ambition setting, identify the end goal, and then allocate resources and staff time to make that happen. That was critical for H&M Group. Getting expert advice to understand material impacts and dependencies in your starting point, and the WWF risk filter is a great starting point for that. And finally, key partnerships. So this is an example of how WWF and H&M Group are working together. I mentioned Business for Nature, and there are many others through which companies can get into this topic.
Well, thank you again, Jaco, for joining us, and best of luck with your continued work. Thank you. And now, Camilla, I'll let you introduce the next collaboration. You can do it from sitting position, it's fine. It's between WWF and one of the leading furniture companies in the world. So
yes,
give the introduction.
We're going to see a movie about a joint project in Indonesia that's connected to forestry. We worked together with IKEA for almost 20 years, and all the time on the forest side. A lot on FSC, spreading that. I mean, we've certified the size of Germany of forest during this time. We've also worked on climate and cotton and fresh water. But this is a very interesting film to see where there's both connecting to natural reserves for wildlife, and this also provides a corridor apart from the livelihood that we're going to see.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So let's watch the film.
Cerita-cerita dari leluhur kami mengakui bahwa orang utan itu asalnya dari manusia. Mereka pergi, tinggal di hutan yang lebat. Orang Dayak sudah lama bertani menanam rotan. rotan yang sangat sakral untuk orang Dayak dan juga dipakai untuk kebutuhan sehari-hari. Dan rotan itu dia menghasilkan banyak bahan. Dia punya kulit, dia punya tengah. Dan dia juga bisa digunakan dengan adanya seperti itu. Hubungan pohon dan rotan itu sangat erat. Rotan tidak bisa hidup tanpa adanya pohon. Sedangkan kami orang Dayak tidak bisa hidup lepas dari hutan. Kita sudah membentuk koperasi untuk bisa mengolah rotan secara berkelanjutan dan mencari pasar. Dibantu oleh WWF dan IKEA hingga kita mendapatkan sertifikasi FSC, dan kami juga mendapat sertifikat tanah supaya tidak dialihfungsikan untuk hal-hal yang lain. Kalau kita tidak menjaga hutan, kita tidak menjaga orang hutan. Kita harus mempertahankan hutan supaya nanti anak cucu kita masih bisa menikmati dengan adanya hutan.
Well, that was truly beautiful, and it also really shows how we're all interconnected and also completely dependent on the ecosystems. Axfood is one of the largest food retail groups in Sweden. But how does this company tackle biodiversity issues? Well, luckily we have with us here in Stockholm to talk about this Helena Allard, Sustainability Innovator at Axfood. So please join us here on stage.
Thank you.
And you have our full attention for your keynote.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes. Thank you. Yes, I'm going to talk about Axfood's biodiversity work. So, first, Axfood in brief. We are one of the largest players in food retail in Sweden, and we reach about 4.5 million customers each week. And our most common concepts known to Swedes are Willys and Hemköp. And Axfood's sustainability strategy is to work with everything that have an impact on us and everything that we have an impact on. And our device is sustainability in everything. And we divide our work into 3 areas, so it's food, environment, people. And our biggest impact comes from food production, so therefore I'm going to focus my few minutes here. And food production is the main driver of biodiversity loss, as we know. And we have a huge responsibility to bend the curve here. And Axfood recently launched a biodiversity strategy, and it consists of 4 parts. So first is to increase the share of products with ambitious biodiversity requirements. 2, improving the minimum standard of all for biodiversity for all products. And halving food waste by 2025 and being a positive force for biodiversity in society. And this strategy is the first step to summarize our current work to be able to further accelerate our work in this area. So more is coming later on. And I'm going to talk about our use of credible certification schemes. And I would say they are the most important tool we have to both get a more sustainable food production, but also be able to offer consumers more sustainable choices. And many certification schemes include measures for biodiversity. So it could be to preserve nature, minimize the use of extra harmful pesticides, or, for example, creating habitats at and around production sites. And here are some of the certifications we use. And we use them in different ways. So partly for increase the share of more sustainable goods on the top to be able to offer conscious consumers more sustainable choices, and also for raising the minimum requirements for all. And we have thousands of products in our stores, so it will be impossible for us to have our own comprehensive sustainability schemes and control programs. So we're happy to rely on credible certification schemes that are adapted to production conditions in specific countries, and that also constantly are developing their criteria and pushing the production into more sustainable production. And one example of how we use them for raising the minimum requirements is that we only use sustainability certified soy, palm oil, cocoa, coffee, and tea in our private label products. And for increasing the share of more sustainable produce to be able to offer conscious consumers more sustainable choices, we have sale targets. So by 2025, we should sell 30% of sustainability labeled products and 10% of organic labeled products. And last year, we reached about 26% of sustainability labeled products. So I would conclude that credible certification schemes are truly useful and effective tools to get an effect on the broad supply of a company, and also to get a steady base for further, more specific projects regarding biodiversity. Yes, that's all.
Well, thank you, Helena.
Thank you.
A question related to the crux we're in now with the inflation, and people are, as the statistics are showing less, they're buying less of the certified products.
Yeah.
So what can Axfood do, and what should we as consumers do in this difficult situation? Because it is about the economy for the families.
Yeah, we have to keep on offering more sustainable labeled goods. But we also, for example, Axfood has a proposal for abolishing or reducing the tax for sustainability labeled products. So therefore, it's getting equally expensive to buy sustainability labeled products. And as a consumer, you can still buy some products, mostly important, like cocoa, coffee, tea, bananas, for example, that have a really high impact on biodiversity. So you can focus on a few products. You don't need to buy all sustainability labeled products if you don't have the money to.
Excellent, excellent recommendations. Thank you very much, Helena.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's continue with another example from the fashion industry with Gina Tricot. And I'd like to ask Camilla to highlight and also to tell us why you're highlighting this example.
Yes. Well, they are going to show an example of what we call a collective action project. And it's related to water stewardship. And the fact that why we like collective action so much is if you're a conscientious company in a river basin along a river, and you're the only one that stops polluting the river, it's not going to change the river. So therefore, it's very good if we can collectively join all the stakeholders, a lot of the companies, the municipality, the authorities, the farmers are the stakeholders in a project. So you can get a bigger effect. So that's what Gina Tricot is part of, is collective action in Turkey.
Excellent. And we will now watch a video. Could you describe who's in it, please?
Yes, it's Rebecca Watkins. She's sustainability, I don't know, I'm not sure of a title.
I might have it in my script.
Thank you.
Sustainability director.
Oh, director, lovely. She can be here or can be live, so it's a recorded presentation from her about their work and ends up in the collective action project.
All right. Well, thank you. Let's watch it.
Yes.
Hi all, I am Rebecca Watkins, working as Global Sustainability Director at Gina Tricot. I am so sorry not being able to join this session live, but I have recorded this short presentation that I hope will be of interest to you all. Gina Tricot is a Swedish fashion brand founded in 1997. We primarily sell fashion and accessories to women, but also to younger girls, as well as have a small home decor line. Gina Tricot has stores in Scandinavia, but also a European web shop, as well as business-to-business consumers selling our products in Europe and Asia. All the way from the start of the company, doing business with heart has been one of our core values. We want to have a positive impact as well as be a positive force, both for people and for the sustainability transformation within the textile industry. As a small brand, we believe in partnerships to scale up our impact, and we team up with experts, scientists, innovators, but also with NGOs. And we are therefore very proud to be able to work together with WWF Sweden since 3 years back. As we know, water is critical for our life on our planet, and it's also crucial to our business. Water impacts occur at all stages of the textile value chain. To mitigate the risks linked to Gina Tricot and our business, we work with water stewardship in partnership with WWF Sweden. Through the stewardship model, we assess water risks in our supply chain, identify challenges, and work in a transparent and collaborative manner to implement solutions. During our partner period, we have assessed the wet processing units in our value chain through the water risk filter provided by WWF. Through this free online tool, we get to analyze the risks in our supply chain linked to physical, regulatory, and reputational water risks. And by better knowing the risks and location of the risks, we can better pinpoint where and how to focus our actions to have the biggest impact. The fashion industry stands for 4 to 8% of global annual carbon emissions, where the largest part comes from the production, and 20% of all wastewater worldwide comes from textile dyeing and treatments. We have a huge responsibility to decrease this impact. At Gina Tricot, we have set an absolute target to reduce our climate impact within all scopes by minimum 50% until the latest end of 2030. We're glad to have our near-term target validated by the Science Based Targets Initiative during 2022. The next step for Gina Tricot in our sustainability journey is to look closer into our impact on biodiversity. And by using WWF's biodiversity risk filter, we hope to better manage and mitigate our impact within this field. As mentioned before, we believe in partnerships, but we also believe in collective action to be able to increase impact. Through our partnership with WWF Sweden, we have joined a collective action project in Turkey, more specifically in the Buyuk Menderes area and delta located at the west coast of Turkey. Turkey has always been the primary production country for Gina Tricot, with a share of almost 28% during 2022. Therefore, it was important to us to have a collective action project in the country. The Buyuk Menderes area holds a large ecological importance. It also holds 14% of the national cotton production, and this is one of the target sections within the project. Cotton is also Gina Tricot's most important fiber, standing for almost 50% of the fibers in our products. The Buyuk Menderes project strives to ensure sustainable water management, and the objectives are, among others, to enhance technical capacity and implement best available techniques in the textile industry, but also to implement water stewardship for cotton production, including regenerational agriculture practices. The project also strives to spread the best practices within the textile and cotton sector at a national level in Turkey. Long-term goals for the project are better water quality, healthier freshwater habitats, as well as enhanced biodiversity. Thank you so much for listening to my short presentation. I hope it could inspire you in some way. Take care and have a great day ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. Corporate climate action, like what we just watched and heard about, is of course extremely important, but it can only get us so far. We also need policy, right, to speed up this transformation and to help us reach the new goals for biodiversity by 2030. And we need now to shed some more light on this. And joining us by Zoom to talk about is Guido Burghoven. He's head policy research and development at WWF International. So please, now you need the clicker, because Camilla is not only the keynote speaker, she's also the clicker woman here. So Guido, wonderful to have you here, and you have our attention to talk about this.
Thank you. I'd like to reiterate three key messages that I've sort of filtered through the last 45 minutes or so. The first one is that we have a global agreement to address the biodiversity crisis. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was agreed in December last year, and in it, governments agreed on a number of commitments for action to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. The next slide, please. So the overall ambition of that framework is indeed by 2030 to have halted and reversed biodiversity loss. And underneath that overall ambition, the next slide, please, there's a series of global action targets agreed for governments to implement by 2030. There's targets around increased conservation, which also includes increased restoration and spatial planning, but there's also targets related to addressing the drivers of biodiversity loss and reducing our footprint of production and consumption. There's targets in that cluster specifically addressing and identifying a number of sectors that drive biodiversity loss, such as food and agricultural systems, such as forestry, fishery, and also the finance sector. There's also a series of targets that address cross-cutting issues such as circular economy, nature-based solutions. There's a cluster of targets around finance, both to hold financing things that are bad for biodiversity and to increase finance that is good for biodiversity. And there are targets that relate to applying a rights-based approach, which means upholding the rights, for example, of indigenous peoples and local communities in the implementation of the framework. So the overall direction of travel to 2030 has been agreed and governments have committed to that. Now, if we go to the next slide, that overall framework also provides guidance to businesses. Again, on the one hand, to identify and eventually reduce and halt activities that are negative for nature. And this is actually a quote from Business for Nature, the coalition that was advocating for the requirement to identify and disclose the risks and dependencies that businesses have on nature as sort of a first step towards really eliminating the dependencies and the negative impacts of businesses on nature. But there's also, in the next slide, there's also the opportunities that the framework creates, for example, by recognizing nature-based solutions, which are solutions to societal challenges, such as climate change, that have also biodiversity benefits, and the need for a just transformation of some of these sectors that drive biodiversity loss. And this graph also shows some work carried out by the World Economic Forum that identifies that these just transformations can potentially generate up to 10 billion business opportunities, business value by 2030, and up to 400 million new jobs that can be created through those transformations. So the framework also sets the overall direction globally of travel for the business community. And then my third message is in the next slide, and that is really about implementation. All elements are now in place for ambitious implementation of actions to achieve those globally agreed and committed targets. Now, the implementation will primarily need to take place at the national level, and the mechanism therefore are these so-called national biodiversity strategies and action plans, in which these global targets need to be translated into national targets. And again, a commitment and requirement of the global framework is that these national target setting exercises will be done in consultation with stakeholders. So certainly also there an opportunity for business to engage at the national level in that national target setting exercise to translate these global commitments. So really three key elements that will enable businesses to set the direction of travel. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Guido. For companies listening in here, I'd like to address the question of collaboration with you. How do they sort of collaborate and strengthen their forces to this policy that needs to be pushed forward? I mean, we really need to make the policymakers understand that there are many companies behind. So how do you find other companies to really sort of join forces?
Yeah, I think there are coalitions both at the global level, but also at the national level, where companies can work together to engage in these stakeholder processes, to set these national targets, and to encourage government to make them ambitious, and then to indeed implement them in collaboration with civil society and the private sector as well. At the same time, of course, at the global level also, we need to continue to hold countries accountable for what they've committed to doing. And there are also the business coalitions working at that level, and they need to continue to engage also at the global level to make sure that this ambitious framework will be achieved by 2030.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Guido. Thank you.
Welcome.
And Camilla, join me here up on next to the table, because I have one final question for you.
Yes.
Companies, again, it's basically the same question that Guido got. How can WWF help? Because that's basically what he said. It sort of seesawed it over to you. You can help in addressing these topics, of course. So how do people find help, and how do they collaborate with you?
Well, since it's global companies, the first thing they can do is look up the national country office, because there are different resources, and when the national plans, it's important to be in the country as well. The other part is you can obviously contact us, me, and you have a lot of resources on the webpage with the risk filters, but not only that, but also links to all sorts of engagements in the climate and biodiversity sectors. And so there's lots of material, and don't hesitate to contact us. Panda.org is the global starting point.
Panda.org.
Yes.
It's a lovely website name, I think.
Yes.
It's been there for a while. Well, thank you very much, Camilla. Fantastic work at WWF, and big thanks to your colleagues too, of course, joining us here.
Thank you.
So it's now time for me to hand over to my colleague Nick Nuttall, and he will head a session on some very interesting solutions to make food production sustainable. So stay with us.